Have you ever thought about how chess engines know the exact evaluation of a position? And do you want to be able to do the same? After all, evaluating a position is more than just counting material, right? In today's video, we will be looking at every important factor to evaluate a chess position. These factors should generally be implemented in the order they are shown. Let's begin. Hey guys, my name is Ishan, and in today's video we are looking at the factors to evaluate a chess position. Number 1 on the list is king safety. The goal of a chess game is to checkmate the opposing monarch, right? So logically, king safety should be the first and most important factor to consider while evaluating a position. This is the only reason that sacrificial attacks exist. The loss of material is compensated for by the compromised king safety of the opponent. Let's look at an example. In this position, white can even sacrifice his queen to expose the black king with the brilliant queen takes f6. Obviously, black has to take gf6. We play rook g3 check. The king is forced to go to h8 and now bishop h6. So you see, white is building up an attack, and let's say after black plays rook d8. Oh, for those of you asking why rook g8 is wrong, well, it leads to mate. Can you find it? Well, the mate is bishop g7 check, rook into g7, rook e8, rook g8, and any rook takes g8 checkmate. So rook g8 won't work, and since rook g8 doesn't work, the only square left for the black rook is to go to d8. After rook d8, bishop f7, black is a whole queen up. Well, a queen for a piece, but still a queen up. And despite that fact, white is winning. This is because the black king is extremely unsafe, and black will have to sacrifice his queen to prevent the threat of bishop g7 checkmate. So the only move to survive here is queen f8. When after bishop into f8, rook into f8, rook e7, we see the second factor in play, which we will come to soon. As you can see, white is creating too many threats, and black's pieces on the queen side are completely out of play. So white should be completely winning. And also, despite the queens being off the board, threats of rook coming to h3 and then there being a mating attack on h7 are really likely, and black cannot do much to stop those threats. Also, the bishop on c8 means that it becomes a target to some double attacks from e8. So suppose after playing rook e3 and then rook e8, black will have to take your rook, and then rook takes e8 is an attack to his bishop. So you see, there are so many threats in the air, and white is completely winning. Number 2, piece activity. That's what we saw in that example, right? How active white's pieces were and how passive black pieces were, which led to white having a winning advantage despite being the balance in material. Piece activity is technically the translation of quality over quantity. If you are up material but all your pieces are passive, then what's the use? Piece activity is often a very overlooked factor. Honestly, tell me, how many times in a chess position have you thought, oh, are my pieces active? It's very rare, right? This is why gambits exist. Things like the Ivan's gambit, the Stafford gambit, they are all just because of piece activity. You sacrifice material, and usually a pawn in gambits, to get your pieces active. Here's an example. In this position from one of my own games, white is a pawn up, but black is threatening to play knight from d7 to f6 to d5. And the white's bishop on c3 will be locked inside its own pawns. So black wouldn't be worse. Instead, white decides to return the pawn and makes his pieces active, opening the dark squared bishop and clearing the d4 square for the knight. So here I played d5. So you can see now my bishop is open and the d4 square has been cleared for the white knight. E takes d5, and white's pieces are so active that he regains the pawn. So after a forced sequence of moves, black won't even be able to hold on to the pawn he just regained. After long castles, which is attacking the pawn directly, black in the game decided to play knight takes c5, which is a very drastic measure. But again, he did this for piece activity. But now it's too late because white's pieces are already far too active. Instead, if you had tried something like knight f6 to defend the pawn, obviously bishop f6, gf6 and rook into d5, and too many threats are in the air, the black king will be hunted on e8 despite there being no queens on the board. Things like knight d4, knight f5, rook e1 check, it's just too much, so black won't be able to handle this. Instead, black played knight c5, trying to activate his pieces, but after b c5, bishop into c5, rook h e1 check, king f8, because if you go to the d file, then rook into d5 comes with a check, rook into d5, bishop f2, bishop b4 check, king g8, rook e d1, and black in fact resigned the game. The point is, I'm going to play rook d8 check next, and there's not a lot you can do to stop it, because maybe you can play g6, but then I can even decide to switch and play rook into b5 first. After all, I am a piece up, so trading pieces is good for me. And black just resigned. So you see, piece activity is even more important to look at than material, which is in fact our third factor. Factor number 3, material. Probably the most obvious one and the one we all consider. If you are up material and piece activity and king safety are equal, then you are winning. Who cares if you have double pawns or lack of space? Just by exchanging pieces and suppressing the opponent's counterplay, you will bring home the win. Material is material and you will have the advantage. For example, here black has every kind of positional trump. He has an outside passed pawn on a7, the bishop pair, and even an outpost on d3. You see how menacing that bishop looks. Unfortunately though, it doesn't matter. As white is up a piece for a pawn, his king is relatively safe, his pieces are active enough, so he wins. So material outweighs every other factor below it. And in fact, the engine evaluation for this position is more than 3 points, which shows that despite black having all his positional trumps, he stands nothing against white's material advantage. There's no point continuing this position because there are a lot of ways white can win. I just wanted to show you the fact that even though black can have everything else in his favor, material alone can outweigh all of that. Factor number 4, pawn structure. If everything is even, then pawn structure becomes an important factor in a position. This is because pawns can't go backwards and there are 8 of them. So pawn structure should be kept in mind while evaluating a position. Here's an example. Here, the kings are safe, pieces are relatively active, and material is level. Although white has the advantage because black has a weak isolated pawn on d5. White can simply build up the pressure on the weak pawn and eventually capture it. So white plays queen d2, and with this move, white is now threatening to play c4, when the pin on d5 would mean that black is forced to give up the pawn. So black plays the logical b5, white plays b3 to further prepare the c4 break, and black is completely helpless against this. So let's say he plays rook c8, he'll play c4, bc4, bc4, queen c7, and cd5 is just winning. So white will now slowly consolidate his position, get his queen to a more active post, and then try to exchange a few pieces and reach an endgame, preferably a queen endgame, where his passed pawn will be decisive. All in all, the pawn structure played an important role there because everything else was even, but black just had one major pawn weakness which decided the game. Factor number 5, space. No, I'm not talking about the outer galaxy and the cosmos. I'm talking about space in chess, which basically means how far advanced your pawns are. In order to coordinate your pieces and maneuver them effectively, you need space. A space advantage basically means your pawns are further advanced than your opponents. So he feels a little restricted because if he moves his pieces far too ahead, they'll get captured by our pawns. It's easy to see why this is an advantage, because your opponent won't have enough space to coordinate his pieces. They will all be stepping on each other's toes, making it very hard to do anything. The best way to neutralize a space advantage is to exchange pieces, so that your remaining pieces will have room to breathe. Let's look at a small example. Here white has a huge space advantage. We will now see the problems black will face due to the lack of space. b4 gaining even more territory. cd4, cd4, a6, black is trying to play queen c7, b5, knight b6, knight c4. But he is too late, because after queen c2, h6 castle, let's say black plays queen c7, because it is so difficult for black to do anything. His pieces are all stepping on each other and it's very difficult to organize them. Like I said, black wants to play b5, knight b6 and knight c4. But this is too slow because white has some plans of his own. After knight g3, b5, f5, knight b6, knight h5. So to defend g7, you'll have to play bishop f8 because castling would directly run into the attack with f6. And now we play f6 nevertheless. f6, g6. And now we have so much space and our pieces are so active that white can even afford to sacrifice the bishop with bishop into g6, f into g6 and not queen into g6 but knight g7 check. Because now if you play bishop into g7 then queen into g6 and then f into g7 and the promotion is very difficult to stop. Let's say you play king d8, then now queen g6 threatening queen e8 mate, and I would say that black has a tough decision to make, whether to resign or to leave the board. It's up to you. All in all, white had so much space that black couldn't even do anything against white's eminent plans. Factor number 6, bishop pair. The bishops are colorblind on their own, but when united, they can become a powerful force, especially in endgames. This is because their long range control helps them to assist passed pawns and attack targets simultaneously. If the position is open, their power is multiplied as they can look at any part of the board and wreak havoc. Let's look at them in practice. In this game between Kasparov and Smyslov, we can evidently see the advantage that white possesses, as his bishops are completely dominating the opponent pieces and pawns. With the two bishops, bad pawn structure is usually compensated for, as the bishops are excellent at supporting and helping the advance of the pawns on both wings. Here Kasparov plays g4, gaining more space. Notice how black's queenside majority is fixed because of our strong bishops, while white's marches on. So let's look at the game a bit. Knight c5, bishop e3, knight d7, g5. So white gains more space. Knight e5, bishop d4, knight g6. You see how the bishops are restricting the knight. King g3, knight f8, h4, rook d8, f4. So white is just pushing on. Bishop e6, bishop c3. And now white decides to go into an endgame, because in the endgame the bishops are even stronger. Rook d1, rook bishop d1. Knight d7, f5, bishop c4, h5. And black played h6, when after gh6, gh6, e5, knight c5, black is threatening a small trap with knight e4 check. But obviously Kasparov is Kasparov, so he doesn't fall for it. King f4, bishop d5, bishop c2, completely dominating the knight on c5, f6, e6, and you can see such a strong passer has been made and white went on to win. The main takeaways from this video are the first three factors: king safety, piece activity and material balance. These factors should always be checked first in the order that they are mentioned. The rest of the factors can sometimes switch places on the list, so they are more specific to the position. For example, a bishop pair can neutralize the pawn structure, or space advantage can beat pawn structure, etc. Well, that's it for today, friends. Please make sure to like and subscribe so I can keep making more content like this. Till then, I'll see you in the next video. Bye.